Hey guys, welcome to the channel. Welcome back from my current subscribers. If you are just watching me for the first time, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button. What I'm going to do here, this is going to be kind of like a how-to video on repairing the lower A-pillar, the bottom of the door jamb, which you see right here on this car. This is a current 67 GTO project, but it's a good example. Most cars, most older cars, this is where they're going to rust. They're going to get a lot of rust in here, and these are areas that you're going to have to fix. I figured this would be a good example to show how I repair this. Your situation might be different as far as what you have to repair, as far as the size of it, how you're bracing the car up. Are you doing it on the car? Is it on a rotisserie like this? None of that really matters. You'll just have to stage the car differently. This video is going to show you how to actually tackle a repair like this. So what we have here, lower A-pillar, a lot of them rust here. You can see we've got rot in here, and on the back side of this steel there was just a lot of pitting. Behind here, all the reinforcement for the lower hinge mount right here was completely rotted. You can see I've already got the spot welds drilled out. I pulled that piece off to inspect the steel, and I decided it's better just to replace this. And I'm going to replace it up to a point rather than replace the whole thing, because the rest of it is actually halfway decent inside. And if you get farther deep into this, how much more are you going to uncover? So we're just going to go ahead and do this. I've already marked where I'm going to cut, and I marked the side of the tape that I'm going to cut. So that way, if I go away from the project and come back, we know what we're doing and we know where we left off. So what I'm going to do here, and this situation might be different than yours, I want to make sure my rocker's not going to move, because we are not connected to a floor in here. So if you have a similar situation, you want to make sure your rocker doesn't move in and out or up and down. I've already got it welded to the car on the quarter panel in the inner quarter, but that's not going to stop it from tipping up and down or moving left and right. I'm going to weld this into here, and this will connect to all of my bracing, and I'll weld it to the rocker, so that will lock that in position. Always keep note of important things like, of course, number one, the location of the hinge bolts, this way, up and down, left, forward, backwards, and also the location of your lower fender mount. Keep that all in consideration when you're putting the new piece on. So I'm going to cut the video here. I'm going to weld this piece in, and then we'll come back and we'll show you the next step. Okay, so what I have here, you saw that I was talking about putting this brace in. This is now welded to the rocker and welded to my bracing in several locations. So what that has done, that has prevented the rocker from moving in and out and rotating, because it's welded on three sides. It's going to have a hard time moving on me, and I want this to stay still. What I also did was, you can see I've already used my spot weld driller, and I've drilled out the spot welds, and then that one on the bottom I had to grind it. This one right here, I had to grind it because my spot weld tool won't fit in there. But what I'm going to do next is start cutting this piece off. The other thing I made up here, you're going to see, this is more of just for setting it. It's not really a fixture like a work holding fixture or a bracing of any kind. What this is doing, you can see it's welded to the cowl here, and then this piece is welded to this round pipe. This is square tubing, and it probably won't pick it up on camera. There you go. You look inside there, I have it centered on the opening, the cutout that's up here. There's one down here and there's one up there. It's centered on the cutout for the hinge bolt. This is where the lower door hinge mounts. And by centering it on there, that's going to tell me when I put the new piece on, if when they made that new piece, if the hinge is going to go on in the same spot as the original. And that's important. Your hinge has to go back on exactly how it was before, or your door's not going to line up. And then I've seen guys, they actually start wallowing out the holes on the door hinges, and that's not really the way to go. You want to make the car correct for the part and not make the part correct for the car. So this is not welded to here. This is just setting the distance. I can move this. You see how I can kind of move it. This sets this distance here. So when I put the new piece in and I shove it in and sit it up against here, I know this face is in the same position as this one is originally. So my door is going to fit. It's not going to be sticking out too far on the bottom, or it's not going to be drawn in too far on the bottom. Okay, I made the cut. Here's something I want to mention to you guys when you're making your cuts. You want the width of your cut to maintain the same width as your cutoff wheel. Mine are about a 32nd thick, so I'm going to have about a 32nd of a gap, a little bit bigger. This is only wider right here because my hand twisted a little bit and the wheel went a little wider right here. But what you want to watch for is as you're cutting the part, this is really critical because this will tell you if you've got an area that's under a lot of stress. As you start to cut it, what will happen is it will start to move. Well, if it starts to move, it's going to move out of location. It's also telling you that there's a high stress area right there, and it could conceivably be very difficult to get the new part to fit. And if you do get the new part to fit, you're going to be lining it up, and now the part of the car, the original part of the car, is going to be slightly off. So as you can see here, nothing really shifted on me. Everything is still the way it was. So I know my bracing is good. Everything on here is holding it in position. So that piece can safely come out now. Pay attention, watch what you're doing. The metal is telling you everything that you need to know. I'm going to go ahead and get this piece out of here, and we'll be right back. Okay, we got that piece cut out. Went really well. Again, I paid attention to what the car was doing. Nothing moved on me. It came out real easy. Here's the piece, and you can see why I'm changing it. And I cut up higher than where the rust is. You can see all this is rusted here. It's hard to pick up on camera, but all through here is pitted really bad. The metal is probably only about a third as thick. And then you can see this. I kind of cleaned it up just to see how thick, how much I had to clean, how thin the metal would get. And you can kind of see there's holes. The camera's not getting it all, but this metal here is way thinner than it used to be, and it kind of goes all the way up again to about this point, because this is the area that was packed with all the seat stuffing, and that's what caused all that to rust. So that's why I'm changing it. And it's a real good, you could look at that shot there. What I say in my other videos about the mice getting into the car, and they pack all sorts of different areas with seat stuffing, and then it gets saturated with urine, and that urine is like battery acid. Well, here's a good example, because this whole area here was packed, but there was nothing down here. And as you can see, this is actually all decent metal still down here. It's almost a shame to have to cut all of this out because of what's compromised here, but because this area and that whole area there is really important to the structure of the car, especially this, because this area here is what holds your door hinge in place. This sees a lot of stress. It's just better to cut it out and get it out of there. So I'm going to use this piece here. I'm going to bring it over to the other piece, and we're going to match it up. We're going to see how good it rests against it. I know the shapes are a little bit different, so it's probably not going to be as good of a match as I'd like, but we're going to make it work. We flip it over, you know, and you look at this from the outside when you're restoring your car, and you think, oh yeah, we've got a pretty good piece here. It doesn't look too bad. Oh, we just have a couple holes here. Some guys will fill that full of Bondo or epoxy or whatever, and or some guys will even weld it shut and think that, hey, we took care of it all. There's no more rust. Well, that rusted from the backside. And this metal is really super thin back here, so that's why we're changing this. I'm going to go ahead and put that on the other piece, start transferring some holes, cut it down. I'll cut it a little bit bigger than this, about a ½ inch bigger, and then we're going to see how it's going to fit. Okay, I got the old piece laying on the new piece. I'll show you how I did my mark, and remember, we're going to cut higher than the mark. I set it on here, and I have them lined up here. They're almost even this way, and you can see it's just the thickness of the steel here. This is just sitting over top of it. So that moves this that way a little bit higher. And that's in our favor because it makes the piece longer. If I was to take this piece and move it back here till this drop down, it makes the piece shorter. See how it fits over here now, but now we're behind this and you can see the gap we have. So always give yourself plenty of extra to work with. Set it up kind of like I did there. Make your mark. Then I'm going to take that and I'm going to cut at least a 1/2 inch higher, which I can trim back. I can lay this in the car, tuck it behind the panel that's there, and I can scribe a line with what's on the car. And that should give me a real close spot to where I'm going to do my final cut and do my butt weld. And remember, I'm also going to put a flange behind this. I'm going to make a flange with all these curves and stuff. If I had a nice flat area, I would use my flanging tool and I would just make the flange on the part. But since this is curving, I'm actually going to cut another strip of this, probably over here. I'll cut a strip. I'll take that edge, that off-cut piece. I'll probably make it at least 1 inch wide, and I'll cut another strip all the way down, and then that part will be my flange that goes behind here. So as we go through it, I'll keep popping the video on here. You can see how it's done. Okay, we got our piece cut out. Here it is. You can see I cut longer than my paint line, which is the length of the original piece. And we ran into a problem, and this is what sometimes you'll run into when you're getting this far into something and you've got to put a lot of bracing on. If you're putting some steel on for fixturing or locationing, or positioning, I should say, sometimes it gets in your way. And what we have here is this piece that you saw me put on to help locate that bottom hole for the hinge is in my way. I had originally welded it to the car, and I just can't get this piece in here. I can't come in from behind because there's structure behind here of the inner part that just won't allow me to bring it in. So what I've done was, and this is just a workaround, you'll find that you may have to do this, and this is going to work out perfectly. I want to make sure this stays in the position, but I need to get it out of my way. Well, how do you do that? How do you take this off but put it back on so that it's back in the same spot? And this is a pretty easy solution right here. All I did, I left it welded to the car. I drilled a hole. This is a 1/4-20 right here, and I came through the backside so that I could bolt this onto here. And we had a nice flat area, so it will always bolt back flat against this face the same way every time. And then the other thing I did was, in front of that, you can see here, I drilled a hole for an 1/8 inch pin. So I'm using an 1/8 inch pin punch. That is an 1/8 inch hole. It's just big enough for the punch to slip in. This slides right in here. Same thing with the bolt. When you drill the hole for the bolt, you want that bolt to just slide in. You don't want to drill the hole oversized. So these two are now going to locate this. I came in here, I cut my tack. There's one on the bottom here and there's one on the top. We just pull these out to pop this piece off out of my way. So you can see I can move this completely out of my way so that now I can take it off the car. I can move it up here and just lock it back in position up here. It doesn't really matter. I'll be right back. We'll show you putting this piece on. Okay, we got the piece mocked in place. I have it clamped. A couple clamps on here. Kind of got it exactly where I want it. When I look inside here, I don't know if you can pick it up. The camera probably won't focus on it. It's pretty close. Up and down, we're exactly where we need to be. What I'm seeing inside there is the pockets on the stamp piece here are about, they're about a 1/16 of an inch. They're favoring the back side of the car about a 1/16 of an inch. So that is actually acceptable because there's so much adjustment in these hinges. It will draw in a little bit more because up here I'm actually overlapped, and once I cut this to fit, you can see where my cut line is. and you can see where my mark is. You can see how we're a lot higher here. So this will draw back. And this brings up another point why you don't want to cut it right to the line before you do your test fitting. If you recall, I laid the piece on here, I drew this paint line, and I said I was going to cut above it. Well, if you were to just cut to that line, you'll see here's the line here, and we're way above our cut line on the car because you can see where I just kind of nipped through right here. So this is our cut line. Well, as you move over, if you look in here, this is above. I'll move the camera down. You can see it. So if I was to cut to that line, assuming that that was the line I needed to be at, we would have a huge gap over here. We'd be above it over here, and it would open up to a big gap, and we don't want that. So that's why you cut it long, give yourself a lot of extra room. The piece went in actually pretty easily. There is a gap back on here, I'll show you that, but everything else went on pretty good. And another thing I always mention is measurements, measurements, measurements. Before you cut anything off, take your measurements, record your measurements. That way you can go back to them. Well, you can see I put a mark on a new piece here. And that is for me to set my tape to go from here to the quarter panel. And I put a mark right here. And I wrote right on there 45 3/8 across. So from this point, right on this edge, over to here, needs to be 45 3/8. Now I just checked that with my tape measure, and it's at 45 3/8. So what that tells me is this section is in the same spot as the original piece on the car, and that's good. We know we're not going to have a binding issue with the door, and if it was too tight and if it was too loose, our seal wouldn't work. So now we know the seal's going to work. So everything is going to work out pretty good here. You remember I had to move this. I didn't put it on video, but you can see I have 56 degrees on here. And you saw me use the profile gauge across this area. Well, this piece was 56 degrees. This is what this angle was. The original piece was 66 degrees. So I had to bend this 10 degrees to get it to work. You can also see that I hammered out that weird shape that was in there. But even in doing all of that, we still have a mile of a gap. I'm going to come in here and hope the camera picks it up. If you look right here, this is the rocker panel, and here's the new piece. That is a huge gap to try to fill. You can even see it on the bottom there. So I'm going to have to bend this piece a little bit. I'm going to bend these pieces here, these two tabs, and I'll have to work on this piece a little bit to get them to mate up better, because I don't want to pull the rocker panel out. And if I try to do that, you can see how it pulls the rocker panel outward. We don't want to do that, because then this might be sticking out too far in relationship to the door and relationship to the fender. So this is going to be a little bit of work to get this done. Once I cut to that line, I'll bring the piece back over, and it should fit in really well. And then I'll make my flange up. I'll show you the flange. We'll get that thing tacked in, and then we'll work on resolving this. But you can see by doing everything we've done so far, you know, we've locked the rocker panel in here, so we know the rocker panel's not moving on us. We've set a gauge right here, a setting fixture, if you want to call it, and a checking fixture through here. So it sets this. This is actually touching here, which is what we wanted. This is set with a pin. It's in the exact same location. Every time I bring it over, it's in the same location. So this is going to work out great. If you start hacking parts off of a car and you don't pay attention to the possibility, or the reality, not even a possibility, the reality that your reproduction part is not going to be the same as the original, before you know it, you're going to have stuff that doesn't fit on your car, or you're going to be modifying some original stuff to fit reproduction stuff. And that's a key point. This is one thing I want to emphasize. When you're working with these old cars and you're working with original parts, let's just say in this door opening here, we're going to use the original door. Let's say the door was beautiful and we're going to use an original door in this opening. Well, if we're not careful with how we set this piece, with how we set the rocker, and with how we set the quarter panel, that original door will not fit the reproduction car, because it basically becomes a reproduction all around here. And then what guys end up doing is they end up modifying the original part to fit what they put on the car. You should actually be doing the reverse. I'll give you an example on this car. Let's just say we did it the opposite way, and we made the original panel fit this opening. Let's just, for argument's sake, we're going to say this opening is going to be a little bit off because we weren't careful with our measurements and we didn't position everything properly. Well, what you'll end up with is a modified door. You modified the original door. Now, no original door will ever fit this car, and since reproduction pieces don't fit, no reproduction piece will ever fit this car. So what that means in the future is if you ever get into an accident, you ever have damage on the door and you have to replace the door, every single time you're going to have to modify the door. So this holds true with doors, trunk lids, you name it. Always make the reproduction pieces fit the original portions of the car, not the other way around. Doors, hoods, fenders, you name it. I'll repeat myself again. Always make the reproduction part fit the original parts of the car. That's what we're doing up here, and that's what I've done everywhere. So we'll be back. I'll show you how we mark this up and get ready to weld it in. Okay, you can see I've got this mocked in place. Lines up really well. There's almost no gap at all, and that's perfect because we're doing a flange behind this. So this will weld together nice, and once it's dressed down, you'll never be able to tell this was done. You can see I've got all of my plug weld holes drilled. The only ones that aren't drilled yet are the orange marks you see there, and those will be to secure the flange plate on the back side. And here's that flange plate. You can see here I just cut this out of an extra piece, an extra to the top section of the new piece, and this will go in behind here halfway. This will get welded in place on the back side, so both sides will get welded to it, and then I'll come in and I'll do a full seam weld all the way across there. You can see I've got the flange on here. I'm going to go ahead and weld this all on. I'm going to plug weld all these holes here to get this flange on here. I'll move the clamps as I go to keep this nice and tight. So we'll start with these two right here, since this is where my clamps are. Notice how I'm moving the clamp every time. Keep the piece nice and tight. And that's that. I'll grab the camera here and I'll show you what we have. You can see here, that's all plug welded on. We'll go ahead and we'll reset the piece on the bottom. We'll reset the piece here. You can see I've already treated the back sides of all the weld areas. Every place I'm going to weld, I've got a coating on it to help prevent rust. So I'll get this piece fit on here, and before I strike a single weld, I'll triple check all of my measurements and locations. Okay, we got the piece mocked in place. Everything lines up really nice. The only issues I see with alignment are going to be the radius right here. The radius on the new piece is slightly different than the radius on the car, here and here. So I'll have to slowly walk these two areas in. I can hammer these in as I go. So I'll start to weld over here. I'll get these plug welds in, these two here, and then we'll start walking this, because what that'll do is that'll pull all this metal this way. We don't want to start welding into here because then we've locked it in position. And just by feel, we're real close. I mean, this is dead flush here. This is almost dead flush here. And then the same thing as we go down here. So as I start to move this piece, everything should fall into play real nicely. So I'll do this one here first. And I'm not going to bore you guys. I'm just going to slowly walk this metal across here, get this all welded up, and we'll be back. Okay, and there you have it. We've got that whole section repaired. Went together great. Everything lined up real nice. You can see I've got the welds all dressed down. You don't want to have any bumps, any holes, misalignments. You know, this is real important because this is part of the lower door jamb. And this supports the lower part of the hinge, the lower hinge I should say, and the fender. You can see I've got a mark here, 2 5/8 of an inch from this edge here to the center of that hole. And when I put the scale on there, it's at 2 5/8 of an inch. So that worked out great. We got lucky on this one. They don't always work out as good as that. I'll roll this around. I'll show you the inside. I've already started to treat it, clean it, and treat it. All of that's been treated. There's the brand new rocker. The brand new lower section is all on there. I've cleaned and treated inside the cowl here, gone all the way up inside. I hope that this video showed you guys that it's not too difficult to do something like this, to make a repair like this. As long as you take your time, you're going to be able to achieve great results. And that's the biggest thing I can say. You got to take your time. If you rush through this thing, if you assume that parts are going to fit, and you saw that I had to modify this thing a little bit to get it to match like the original, and every measurement I check is dead on. This thing worked out. If you remember the fixture I had on here, this pocket right here ended up being down less than a 1/16, about a 32nd. So when I got that into final position, this thing is within about 15 thousandths of being where the original one was. So you really can't complain with that. For a reproduction piece, that worked out great. Yeah, we had to modify it a little bit, but other than that little bit of modification, everything went on. I have the numbers that match what the original one was, so I know when the door goes on here, it's going to fit in here the way it did before. Because when I did the quarters, I still had the factory rockers on here, and I still had the door on here. The factory door was bolted to here, and I lined the quarter up with the door. As I mentioned before, you always want to make the reproduction part fit to the original part. All these locations, and this is all new stuff now, but I verified all these locations are going to match as per the original. So this worked out great. Anyway, as always, like, subscribe. If you got any questions or comments, feel free to ask or make your comments. I hope this helped. I hope you learned a little something. The biggest thing I hope you all take away from this is anyone can do this. You just have to take your time, and you have to know how to weld. But beyond that, you can do your project in your garage and save yourself a ton of money. I got to run the hours on this, but I know just this repair right here of this piece is not what was not cheap. There was a lot of hours in getting the old piece off and getting the new one fit before I even welded it. So I'll run the hours on that. We'll just add it to the bill and start moving forward because we'd like to get the floor in this thing next week. So thanks for watching. Stay tuned for more.